Welcome to this new how-to. In this how-to, we're gonna look at the TBM 930 in Flight Simulator 2020. In this video, we will look at some basic principles as well as we do our first flight with the TBM 930. It's one of the most popular turboprops in the game itself, right? Because it's used by a lot of people. So what we will do is we will make sure that we're ready for takeoff. Then we're gonna take off and increase the altitude. Then navigate a bit, but we're going to use VFR, so not IFR, right? Which means that we're going to use visuals for navigation. And then land again on this airport somewhere in the nice country of Portugal. You can see the weather is pretty nice. So let's go inside the cockpit and let's have a look at it. Welcome in the cockpit of the TBM 930. Here you can see the co-pilot, right? If we turn a little bit further, we can also see that we can transport some passengers if we want. And as mentioned already, the cockpit is pretty modern with 3 displays in the center. Then we've got the MFDs over here. We've got the circuit breakers. We've got a throttle area. And if we look at the top, we can see the electrical systems to switch on the lights, but also to switch on the power itself, the engine start buttons and the autopilot. Don't worry, we're going into more detail in them within a few seconds. First of all, we're going to concentrate on this part of the pilot because we're going to look at some things which are really useful before starting the aircraft. So one of the first things is, of course, the yoke, right? The yoke can be used in multiple modes. You can use it to steer, but you can also have additional buttons like the timer. If you want to start a specific timer, if you want to fly in X minutes a certain direction, you can use it. You've got the identify button that's mainly used for the transponder, if I'm correct. And then you've got certain buttons which are not working. That's this button, you can't use it, the storm and the clear button, and the CWS button. Those are the buttons which are not working in this aircraft. Don't worry if you say, okay, hey, if I click on it, nothing happens, because that's expected. Then we've got the autopilot and trim disconnect, right? If we switch on the autopilot, we can trim or disconnect the autopilot if we don't want to use it anymore. And then here we've got the yaw and the pitch trim buttons over here on the steering wheel. Now, while starting the aircraft, it might be useful to hide the yoke. And as you already saw earlier, you can do that in this case by clicking this button, which will simply hide it, which will allow you to switch on certain buttons which are over here. For example, the parking brake, but also the other items like the landing gear, as well as the de-icing system, which is also hidden here, and the cabin lights. On the left side, we can switch on the airflow, like the air controllers. We can change the temperature and also change the airflow, right? We can switch it on harder or softer. The display backup option, that doesn't work, but don't worry about that. Then we've got the safety master and safety master caution and safety master warning buttons. If those are illuminating, then you likely need to take an action, and that will be displayed on the screens which we have over here. Here we can change the barometric pressure, right, which we'll go to a little bit later. And then this is the part for the autopilot. The autopilot, we're going to cover it in another video, but really short, here's where you can change the method of either using the heading mode, which is heading select, or using the navigation mode. Or if you're in an approach, you can activate the approach mode. Here we can activate the flight director as well as the banking mode. And here we can switch on the autopilot as well as the yaw damper. Altitude and vertical speed modes, those can also be activated, but that's more to the right, so more to the co-pilot, where you can also change the vertical speed, right? That's the climb rate of how fast you want to climb or descend, as well as the VNV mode. And the VNV mode is for vertical navigation. It's also known as the VNAV mode, if I'm correct. So keep that in mind. If you see VNV, it likely refers to VNAV, which we'll also discuss in a future video. Flight level change, also to climb a certain, I would say, in a certain angle or a certain speed, then you can press the flight change mode. It will make sure that you're flying or climbing in this case, and then maintaining a certain speed, as well as the speed units option, which will allow you to change the speed units, right? Then on the right side, we've got the same thing for the co-pilot, right? So same buttons are not working. And other than that, we have the circuit breaks on this end, but these also can't be used in Flight Simulator 2020. In real life, hopefully they can work. Then in the center, we've got a lot of buttons. For example, we've got the pitch trim, which we could also control using the yoke. We've got the manual override, as well as the pitch and aileron trims left and right. And then here we've got the throttle. And as you can see, the throttle is a little bit special because it has, I would say, yeah, a split here where it can either go into reverse mode or you can completely shut it down. And that's really important to understand because the reverse mode allows you to, I would say, go back with the aircraft, right? So if you don't have a pushback truck, they can simply push it in the reverse mode, and that will, I'd say, make it possible to go into the or yeah, go back. So not to the forward, but more to the back, right? So instead of, say, let me show it like this. Instead of driving to the buildings or car or hangars, we're driving over there where the runway is located. So that's where you can use this button for relatively easy, but keep in mind that you might need to configure this specifically on your joystick, else it might not work. If you're using the keyboard, then likely pressing the F1 key for a very long time will bring this one into the reverse mode. As you already saw, there's also a nice button over here, right? So if we move over to the throttle, that's where we can also see the touch and go button, which you can simply press and then it will go into the touch and go mode, which will push it forward. Then on the other side, let me see if we can move into the direction. We've got the feather option and the high and low mode. These are used to control the engine power. In some cases, you might want to use that to optimize the engine mode. And then here we've got the flaps, right? So flaps up, takeoff mode, landing mode. So you don't have the, I would say, degrees, but here you've got really the modes where you can push the flaps into. If you want to, for example, take off, you need to switch into this position. If you're landing, you need to push it into this position. So pretty nice and pretty useful. Now, how to get the airplane started, right? That's where sometimes the difficult part comes into, but luckily we've got a really nice checklist. And as you can see, the checklist is pretty extensive. So first of all, you've got the inside inspection. And if you use that nice little eye icon, it will bring you to the area where you need to look at. So in this case, you can see external light, internal light, etc. And you can simply check them and move on to the next position and do that one by one to make sure that the aircraft is in a correct state before really, I'd say, taking off, right? So the crash leveler, which is over here, which is switched on to avoid that that you accidentally switch on the electric sources. You can see the starter button, which is located here, which is switched off. The ignition is set to auto. And if you're not sure if it's in auto mode, simply push it down and push it up again to make sure that it's correct. Now, the nice thing about this checklist is that you can tick the items, right? So ticking the items will make sure that it increases the list over here and will also make sure that you don't forget to do anything. So we're continuing the list, right? The aux boost pump is switched off. Then the fuel selection mode is set to manual, which is the case. Ticking the options. Then the AP trims also switched to off. The de-icing, this will bring us to this position. And you can see everything is switched off by default, which is good. So we're gonna check mark it. And you can see that the eye icon is really useful if you're new to the cockpit. I would say the more you play the game, the more you fly in Flight Simulator, you probably get a better understanding of where you can find the buttons, and you likely don't need to use these eye icons anymore. But I still think they are very useful in some cases. Like if you're just starting or if you didn't fly the aircraft for an extended time, you can still use it. I must warn you that in some scenarios, the checklist, if you press the eye icon, doesn't focus on the instrument or on the controller. If that's the case, yeah, then it's becomes kind of pretty hard because then you need to find the item yourself. In that case, if that happens, then have a look at the description below, because the description over here contains some useful information where you can find the information. So throttle is set to cutoff, right? This is the cutoff mode. Reverse mode, cutoff mode, that's good. And then we need to make sure that the fuel tank is set to either open and left or right. So we need to change this button, and then you can either push it into this position where you see the small arrow. Let me deselect it with, oh. So here we go. Here you can see that white line that's pointing to the tank which you selected. In total, you can see that there can be 553 liters or 146 US gallon per tank. So you've got a left tank and a right tank, which you can both fill. And to show you how to do that, I'm gonna show you this nice option in the menu, which is the weight and balance. So here's where you can define the weight and balance. So for the left tank and for the right tank, currently you can see that they're 50% filled, which means 75.25 gal, right? Depending on if you switch this option on, you will go to the LBs, which are showing different values. If you switch the button, you can see that only this refers to the fuel tanks and not specifically to the payload of the passengers. You can add additional passengers by simply clicking here and then adding the value. So pax left, pax right. Pax stands for passengers. So in this case, it shows the position for the passenger behind the pilot and then behind the co-pilot. And then the rear refers to the pilot to the passenger, which is sitting in the back of the aircraft. And then we also have the gear, the baggage. And the baggage that's over here. And then we've got a lot of undefined things. Again, I'm not sure where these are for. It's kind of weird, but I also didn't figure out if there are any issues if you change them. It looks like that they have a default value of 5, but looks like this is, I would say, kind of a bug currently in Flight Simulator. Now, once you've done that inside inspection, it's time to start the engines, right? And we can do exactly the same process. So we can say, hey, the crash leveler needs to be up, which is in this position. This will make sure that you can move the buttons over here. So we're going to say this is good. Then we're going to make sure that we're on battery mode, which means we moved up 1 position. And that's only for this one. And that's the electrical source, because we need to have some power, because else we can't start the aircraft. Then once you've done that, you will sometimes see that things are changing. And that's also in our case the scenario, right? So you can see the displays are switching on, but you can also see that the AHRS align, keep wings level. That means that it's, I would say, calibrating the systems. So wait for this to continue. In addition to that, in the center display, you've got the software version, also the navigation data, right? So the navigation data, depending on if you've got a Navicraft subscription or if you've got the Flight Simulator subscription, which means actually the Flight Simulator installation, so no Navicraft subscription, you will see that this version will automatically update. The system only updates if, in this case, working title updates the system. That's where the WT stands for, which is mostly only done with aircraft updates. On the bottom, we can see the MFDs and PFDs, and that's where you can change the multiple things, which we will go into in a future video. For now, we will simply accept the default settings, which are okay. In the meantime, you can see that the calibration has been performed, which is good. And if the calibration has been performed, we can see the altitude, we can see the speed, but also the direction of our flight, the heading modes, if there's wind data available, and if you would configure navigation beacons, they will also appear in this area. This again will be discussed in a future video where we're going to look at, okay, hey, how can we use this system in a more advanced scenario compared to where we are now. For now, we're going back to the generator because we need to switch on the generator. So let's switch on the generator for the engine. And that's good, right? So everybody's happy. So we're going to mark it and then say DI system test. And that's this small button. So you can press it. And if you press it, you will see that the lights are burning here. So these are the warning lights to warn you about the or sorry, to show you if the certain icing system has been enabled. In some cases, you need to play around with your mouse a bit because you see it's pretty close to the propeller de-ice option. So make sure that you're close enough to this one and then you can test it. Then also the landing lights check, and that's also something which you can do. So you can use the light test and check down test, right? So you can press the options over here, and then you can see what happens. And over here, you can also see that it works, right? So press the light test and check down button, and then check that the lights are working correctly, and they are working correctly, right? So also check, well, then of course check the fuel which is on board, right? We already done that, right? By using this nice option over here. If you see the weight, then make sure that you've got enough fuel for your for your flight 3. And in addition to that, what you can do is you can also check that in this nice display, because this nice display has a lot of options. Currently, the primary flight display is shown, but you can also go to the MFD, and the MFD has some other options. For example, you can check the aircraft systems, you can also configure the SimBrief integration, you can define your flight plan, you can check the weather, you can have a look at the charts. But likely, if you want to know more about the view, you need to go to the aircraft system. And inside the aircraft system, you can see multiple things. One of them is the view, as already mentioned, right? If you select that option, you will be able to see more about the view in some scenarios. And you also have the weight and view, which brings you to this option. So keep in mind that in some scenarios, if you're pressing an option, it might not show it directly. However, in our case, this is logical because we didn't activate this display. So if you're not seeing anything, then make sure that you hit the button of this screen, which will allow you to move to the different systems. As you can see, it moves over here to the different views. So this is the fuel view, and that's where you can see how much fuel is in each side of the wing. So pretty useful and pretty nice. If you don't want to see it anymore, you can either select one of the other options or simply ignore it for now. Now let's make sure that we're checking the weight and the view, right? So the weight and the view can be done using this button, weight and view. And there are a few things which you need to validate. The first thing is that in some scenarios, you will see that the basic empty weight is set to a crazy high value. And crazy high, I really mean crazy high because it's by default set to 4, 6, and then 3 digits, which will result in that the takeoff, let's say weight of the aircraft is far too much. So what you need to do is you need to set the empty weight by using this button. And according to several sources on the internet, it needs to be set to 4629 in lb or 2079 in kilograms. And then if you changed it, right, by using the digits, you can press enter, and then you can change the crew and the stores where you can find the weight of the crew. So you can say, hey, a crew is 150, for example. And then you will see that the basic operating weight is increasing. Then if you've got passengers and if you've got cargo, you can define them over here. So you can define the number of passengers as well as the weight of the passengers and then the additional cargo. This in total will increase the zero fuel weight, right? So that's what we call the zero fuel weight, which means that the operating weight, including the pilots as well as the passengers, including the cargo. Then you go to the takeoff option. And the takeoff option, that's where you define the fuel which is on board, which in our case was twice 71 US gallon, right? So 71 plus 71 is 142, right? So entering it here, and then you can see that the aircraft weight in total is 5730 lb. So if you see yellow warnings over here, which you don't see yet in my case, then you need to make sure that you're changing the operating weight of the aircraft, because likely then there's an issue with that one. Once you've done that, right, you can place a check mark over here and you can go with the engine start. And the engine start is pretty nice because if you select the option, you will see that this display also changes, which shows still the view, but you can see that there is still off. And several other meters like the oil pressure, the oil temperature, also the warnings and the arrows are here, also very useful. You can see the electric system, You can see the trims, right, up and down and left or right for the roller. And you can see the flaps in which stage they are. So currently they're in the stage switch up. That's good. We can see the view also over here. And we can see the altitude as well as the RPMs of the engines, which likely is now 0 because there's nothing happening. Nice thing is that on the right side, you can see the traffic map. And the traffic map is currently set in standby because we're not airborne yet. After we're airborne, we can switch it on. The good thing is that this one is also, again, pretty detailed. The engine start list. You've got the motoring. If resistant ITT is above 150 degrees, and the ITT is the temperature of the exhaustion, and that's over here. And you can see it's currently set to low, below 150. So we don't need to worry about that. If you have that situation, then you need to perform these steps first before doing that. So in this case, we're going to press the options again. We're going to make sure that the ignition is switched to on, which is the default setting. Place the check mark. We're going to make sure that the fuel pump is switched to on. Place the check mark. The propeller area clear. This one, for example, here you can see that the eye icon doesn't work, but it simply means that you need to watch that there are not people walking around. Because if there are people walking around, you don't want to hit them with the propeller. That's the case. So then we're going to switch on the starter button, which we can again see on the top. So we're going to press it, and then likely it will switch off to off automatically. As you can see, it did it. And then we're going to make sure that the throttle low idle when NG is 13. So if we press this option, you can see that although we press start, right, you can see that the percentage is now increasing. So that's very useful based on this nice eye icon again. Here you can see the percentage of NG. When the NG is 13, set to low idle. In this case, you can see that it's still set to, say, cutoff mode. So you can decide to increase it if you want. So you can push it a little bit forward, right? Either using your mouse, or in some case you can also do it using your controller if you're lucky enough to have a controller. If you're using the keyboard, then like the F1 key and the F2 key, right? Or the F3 key, sorry, in this case, will increase the throttle. So once that's done, you can press the option. And here you can see what happens, right? The engine is now starting more. You can see that the NG is increasing to 60%. Watch out that you're not pushing it too far, because if you're pushing it too far, your aircraft might start to drive, right? If you forget to put on a parking brake. So watch out for that one. Then if we look at the temperature, maximum 170 for 20 seconds, right? So if the IT exceeds those values at any point, abort the engine. Start. In our case, it's already stabilized at 170 with the 18, so that's pretty good. And we're gonna press it. And then if the NG has not started 30% by 30 seconds, which means within 30 seconds, the NG value needs to be at a certain percentage, or by 50% by 50 seconds after the engine start, abort the engine start. But in our case, it's already 61%, which is good enough to continue. So pressing the option again. Then we're going to the oil and pressure, and here we can see that everything is in the green area. Might be a little bit hard to see, so let me zoom in a bit. And here you can see it's in the green area for both the oil pressure, PSI, as well as the oil temperature. So I'm gonna make the check over here. And then the automatic start, the CAS message. Starter should not remain displayed when the NG reaches 52%. And what they mean with that is these messages, right? So these are the warnings, like the parking brake is set, but also the ones about the or the errors, and the warnings. And if they're blinking, you likely need to do something about it before, say, continuing. In this case, we're going to say, okay, we're ready, and we're ready for the engine after start, which brings us to the next position, which is that we need to make sure that the engine is idle, which is the case. If you're not sure, then simply press F1, right, which returns the engine to idle mode. You're going to check the oil pressure again. Still good. that's still good. And then we're gonna move to the aux option button, which is over here. And then you need to watch out a bit, because in some scenarios it will it allows you to select a different button. But in this case, it's a view selection. In this case, you need to make sure that you're as much to the left and then switch to auto, which is the case. And then you can set the view selection button, which over here, also to auto. View shift selection, you can press the option and check if it switches between the left and right tank, right and left and right tank. We already discussed it, right, using either this tank or this tank. And you can see, you can check the let's say if it uses it, right? So in this case, we pressed it very shortly, but if you would press it for a longer time, let me do that. Here we go. You would be able to see that this one is okay, it's reducing, right, from 71 to lower values. In this case, you can also see that this one has been set to auto, right, as well as the, I would say, the kind of control mechanism also being switched to auto. So this, if you don't want to wait to reduce, then press the option again, press this shift button. And then if you look very closely here, you can see that this green arrow has now moved to the other side. So you don't have to wait till really the view is out of the engine. Then we've got the autopilot and the trims. It needs to be set to on. So we're going to do that. We're going to make sure that the generator is set to main. So make sure that it's set to main, which should be already the case. So press the option. And then we've got the bleed over here, which can be set to auto or max diff. If you want to make yourself easier, then switch to auto. And this is to control the cabin air, control the cabin air, I should say. So once we've done that, right, we can still see some lights burning here. The stall, no heat. The pitot, not heat, left and right, and the aux position, aux boost pump on. If you have those options on, then you can decide to switch them off. Although you would see that later on in the checklist, right, just before the takeoff, you switch it to auto, and then likely most of the warnings will go away. But if you want to, now as you can see, everything is running nice and smoothly, right? So the engine is running. You can see some heat air coming from the let's say exhaust, which is good. So we need to watch out that we're not gonna hit it, right? Because that's not what we want. And we're almost ready for taxiing, right? So let's figure out a little bit on the outside to see if we can find the taxiway. As you can see, it's a relatively small airport, and then a car decides to run into us. So let's go inside the air and then see where we can take off. So over here we can see the taxiway, which is relatively short, and then we see a nice grass runway, which we can use to take off. You see that the area is really nice, so we're almost good to go. So let's go inside the aircraft again, and let's prepare the aircraft for taxiing, and after that, take off. So as mentioned, we're almost ready for takeoff. Let's do some before taxi checks. And the first one is the inertial separator. It must be switched to on, and you will find it here. You can see that I already switched it on. It's in the DI system. Once you've done that, you can check the controls. And the controls are, of course, the yoke, but also the pedals on the floor. So we're going to unhide the yoke from the pilot, and then make sure that if we're pressing our keyboard or using our gamepad, that everything is moving around. That's good. Then the flaps must be in up position. As mentioned already, here are the flaps. And in my case, they're not in the correct position as I played around with it. So move them up and then press the option. Then the feather twice, right? So switch to low idle, then flight, then back to flight idle. So what you need to do is increase and decrease throttling. For that, you might need to configure a separate option in your joystick. And the reason for that is what we earlier mentioned, is that currently you can see that it's, I would say, in a special position. And if it's in that special position, I can move it around. But if you would move it using, for example, a mouse, or you're configuring a button which allows it to go to feather mode, then you would need to press it into this area and then back to flight idle mode, and that several times. So try that with your joystick. If you can't figure out how to do it, then leave a post in the comment box and I will help you with that, because that sometimes can be a little bit tricky. I also needed to check it multiple times before that one was working. Once we've done that, we can go to the taxi lights, which are on top of the screen. So we're gonna switch it on, or on top of the cabin, I should say, and make sure that they are switched on, which is good. And then we're gonna switch off the parking brakes, right? So switch off the parking brakes, and parking brakes, if you don't know where to find them, they're behind the yoke. If you use that icon over here, it will automatically hide the yoke. We can switch it off and then make the yoke visible again, so it's easier for you. And then you can see the aircraft directly starts to drive. So that's one warning for you. So if you're seeing this behavior, that's perfectly normal for this aircraft, although it can be pretty nasty, because you could see that we're almost hitting the hangar. So make sure that your throttle is really set to idle, and watch out that you're not hitting a wall, because then you can start from scratch. So going back, right, we're going over the taxiway, and then we're gonna go to the left side of the runway. So let's do that. And since we're now on a really, I would say, a special airport, right, with a lot of green areas around us, that's fine for now. Normally you would follow the taxiway to make sure that you're not hitting any aircrafts which are preparing to take off or maybe prepared to land. And of course, you're always contacting the ATC to ask for approval for takeoff. If you don't get the approval, then please don't do this, because they probably don't like it, and you might cause certain nasty situations, which you of course don't want to have. In this case, the aircraft needs to have enough power to make that turn, right? Because you can see it's almost, let's say, having some issues with it. If you're having some issues with turning the aircraft, then simply increase the throttling a bit. But don't forget to push on the brakes pretty fast, because else it goes too fast. And then you say you can't, or you don't have enough runway length. So then we're at the, before the takeoff, right? Before lineup. So we're gonna make sure that the parking brake is on. Then you directly will hear some alarms. You can ignore them for now. And then we're gonna make sure that we switch on the lights, right? So the landing lights need to be switched on. So we're gonna push this one to this position. We're gonna check it. Then we're gonna go to the navigation one, which is over here, followed by the strobes, which are next to it. And then we can set the ignition to either on or to auto. So auto is the top mode, on is the middle mode, but that's only if required, right? But you can switch on just to be sure. Then we've got the auto pump, the aux boost pump, sorry. That one has already been set to auto, which is good. Fuel selection, we also tested it and made sure that it's set to auto. Then the DI system, and the DI system can be found here, and you can switch it on if it's very cold. If it's not very cold, you don't need to do it. As soon as you switch them on, you will see that some lights will start burning, and that's good, because that will indicate that the system works. If it doesn't work, then you might have a challenge and you might need to go to the repair shop first. But you still see that we've got these errors here, right? So the pilot or the pitot, no heat left and right, and the stall, no heat. And that was what's coming in next, because this one is the button which will resolve it, right? If we're switching on these options, you will see that the error will go away. Only the error is there about the parking brake, but hey, that makes sense. Then intercept, switch to on, and then we need to control the trim and set it to takeoff mode. So this is, I would say, something which you probably like to do, because if you're not doing it, then you, I'd say, might hit some challenges. Initially I thought also, hey, there's a way to control this, but there's no, let's say, markings over here where you can say, okay, hey, I set it to takeoff mode. So here it says adjust the elevator, rudder and ill trims for takeoff in green sectors. So I tried to find it, but I didn't find it yet. You can see that I would say if you would pitch it, right, nose down, that's likely not the correct way. In this case, we need to do nose up. But be careful with trimming these options. And the trim, you can see it over here. Because if you're switching it too active, then you might hit some issues. So you can see in this case, we're very far to the up mode, which we likely don't want to do. We likely want to switch it into that green area, which is over here. And that's good, right? So if you change the trims, then make sure that you're in the green area over here in this nice display, right? If that's the case, then you're good. And then the next step is to switch the flaps, which are over here, to takeoff mode. And those are here, right? So let me move it one position. If we're then going back to this system, you can see that it shows, hey, they're now in the takeoff mode, which is, I would say, good. Rudder, still good, although this is the green area, right? If you know how to deal with those, because I don't actually know, then let me know if you need to make some modifications to the rudder. But based on my experience, I didn't make any change to it and it worked for me. Then we've got the bleed. It's still set to auto mode, which is good. Then the altimeter, that also needs to be set correctly, which can be done using this. The easiest way to do that is by pressing the letter B from Bravo on your keyboard. You could see that the altitude now changes to the basic level. And if we would look at the baro values, right, over here and over here, you can see that they're changing, right? So you can always change it using this button if you like, but be careful with that. Keep in mind that this one is controlled using this button. And this one is used to control this item. So if you want to do it manually, you need to use both this one. And for the co-pilot, you have it on the right side. Then we're at the alt select mode, and the alt select mode is over here. This really, if you want to use the autopilot, then you can see that currently there's no altitude being set up. But if you want to use the autopilot, you can now, let's say, turn this wheel to a certain altitude, like 2,500 feet, and then it's being set. But this is only required if you want to use the autopilot. Since we're not going to use it, I'm not going to go into more detail for that. And then you can set the transponder code. And the transponder code, that is again a special one. So what you need to do is you need to go to Home. And inside Home you will find a lot of those tiles which you can use. And that's where you also would be able to configure the radio system. Now, of course, when always telling it, I'm lost. So I always need to check. And if I'm thinking about it, the most logical option would be to go to the navcom option. And that's where you will find the transponder, right? The transponder currently has been set to 7,000. If you're getting permissions from ATC to, let's say, take off, then you get, or likely you will get it when taxiing. Then you can change this value by pressing the value over here and then simply say 7,000. And then, of course, don't forget to switch to on. In this case, we're going to fly VFR. So we're pressing the VFR button, right? Just to demo it, right, I'm going to simply hit a different number and then press VFR, which in that case is 7,000, and then says altitude reporting, and you can switch it to on if you want. So we're ready with a takeoff or line up a checklist. So let's go to the takeoff, right? So in this case, I'm going to first go to Home, and then I'm going to switch back to the PFD just for sanity check. And reset the view. You can still see that warning light is here, but that's due to parking brake. So it says, okay, the prop RPM needs to be in the green area. So if we look at this part, we can see the prop RPM is now in the yellow area. As soon as we start increasing, what will happen is that it will move further into the right position. You can see that if we're increasing it, you can see both that the torque as well as the RPMs are increasing. In some cases, be careful with it, right? Because you don't want it to push it in the red zone. So we're gonna make sure that it's in the green zone. So it's now in the green zone. So let it stabilize. If it's going too far, you can always decrease it, of course. In this case, you can see that the torque is 59, right? So let's release the parking brakes and then add power, which will make sure that we're pressing it likely be a little bit further. And then the torque will go to 100%. And then we're going to make sure that the rotation speed, once we're hitting that, we're going to pitch the plane up with 10% with sufficient speed. And then of course, when we're done, we can do the landing gear up, flaps up, if the speed is above 150 knots. So let's reset the view. And let's take off. So we're going to remove the parking brake, pitch the aircraft in the correct area. In some cases you will hear warnings. If that's the case, then directly abort your takeoff, because then something is wrong with the airplane. As you can see, the airspeed is still increasing, but still in the red zone. And the runway here is, I would say, a little bit too short, I would say. And here you can see the warnings already, right? So if you're seeing warnings, then something is wrong. In this case, we need to be very careful, because likely we can go into stall mode because we really push the aircraft to the max. So once we're airborne, you can always, say, check this list. And what likely is the issue with the TBM 930 is that the ITT, which is over here, let me show it, is going into too hot mode. And if you're going too hot, then we need to do something about that. And the only way to resolve that is by decreasing your altitude, or decreasing your throttle, I should say. So we're going to decrease the throttle, so decreasing the RPMs, and then you will see that the torque will also go away, and your warning or your error will go away, which is good. So now we're airborne, right? We can fly around, we can look around. So let's look at the speed. The speed is also good. So let's push the flaps to central mode, or to default mode. And then we can simply also lift the gears, right? So if you didn't do that, then you can lift the gears. Then make sure that you're paying attention to the gears light, right? Because you don't want to be in a gear situation where it's not in the correct position. By default, you will see it blinking a few times, and then after it stopped blinking, it's ready. And if we would go outside the aircraft now, so let's do that, you will see that the gears are now up. So that's good. So, and that's our takeoff, right? So if we would now look at the air, we can see some nice windmills over here. And likely over there, there's the airport which we used for takeoff. Once you're airborne, it's always a good idea to reduce the speed. Simply decrease throttling, but always keep an attention to the speed. It needs to be in that green area. If it's not in the green area, then it could become dangerous. Either you could go into overspeed, or you could go into a situation where your speed is too low. So be careful with that. As we use the trim wheel, right? The trim wheel, which we already used, you can also see that if you're changing things to the aircraft, for example, if you change the speed, the throttling, or if you change the flaps, you likely want to change the elevation, and that's to prevent that you continuously need to push or pull the joystick. And that's where the dangerous things come into. Some joysticks are very sensitive, so be very, very careful with moving those trim buttons, because they could, say, put the aircraft into stall mode. And, well, I don't know, probably I don't have to explain what happens in that case. So be very careful with moving that button. In some cases, you can decrease the sensitivity of it. If you have that option, then please do it. And then once you fine-tune the trim mode, then you can certainly fly nicely and enjoy the nice scenery around you. Always, of course, keep an eye on the altimeter as well as on the speed meter. So if you're going too fast, simply decrease it. And the nice thing about this is that you can really see if you're going slower, if you're decreasing speed, or if you're increasing speed based on this small, nice pink line. So currently we're going pretty stable speed. But if I would now put the nose down, like I'm currently doing, you would see it will slightly delay speed or might increase the speed. So we're still in the air, right? We're now decreasing speed massively, so I'll likely need to adjust my trim a bit. So let's do that. while we've done that, I'm gonna mark the checklist as completed, as well as the after takeoff list. We can simply mark them all as completed. And then you can continue with the climb, right? And that climb is that you need to set the altimeter. You can activate the autopilot if you want, but as mentioned, we're going to do that in a later video, not in this one, because we just took off using the default method. And right, what you want to do is you don't always want to fly with the autopilot. In some scenarios it might be useful, but in other scenarios you might want to prefer to fly manually. So while airborne, we could do two things, right? I already mentioned at the start of this video that we're likely going to do a landing, but rethinking about that, I think we still stay airborne and we'll do a landing afterwards in a separate video, because this video might be already pretty lengthy. So with this special view of the aircraft, I want to thank you for watching this one. I hope you find it useful. If you've got questions or comments, then feel free to post them in the comment box of this video. And if you want to stay up to date about new videos I'm posting, then make sure that you're subscribing to my channel. Also, if you like this video, then use that nice thumbs up, because that will give me some feedback that you like the video and also helps the YouTube algorithms to promote my video. With this, again, thanks for watching, and I would say happy flying using the TBM 930.